We spent some time with my mom in Richmond, and then we went on to Columbus, where we spent time with Mrs. Heiss, Emily's mom. Em took me to Atlanta to catch a flight out to Vietnam, and from Atlanta I flew to San Francisco, and then by this time there were many means of transportation up to Travis because there were lots of people going back and forth to Vietnam at that time. They had many flights. So I went to Travis. We flew out, landed in Hawaii for a short time, landed in Guam for a short time, and then landed at Memoirs, Vietnam, which was a large U.S. Air Force base. And from there, we got off the plane, got on buses, and they took us to a repo center, a replacement center, there at Long Binh, not far from Benoit. Long Binh was also the headquarters of the United States Army, Vietnam. At the repo center, I pointed out to them that I had orders to the 82nd, and they told me that they didn't pay any attention, basically, to these orders, that when people came into Vietnam, they went to wherever they were needed most at the time. We stayed there several days getting an orientation on Vietnam and for the situation, and I got my orders, finally got my orders, and I was anxious to see where I was going to get sent. Well, I didn't go anywhere. I stayed right there at United States Army Vietnam headquarters at Long Binh, and when I reported to the headquarters, I didn't know what job I was going to do, and I did know I was going into the G3 section, but I didn't know where. So I went in, got oriented there, and then were told that the officer in charge of war dogs would be leaving, and I would be taking his place. Well, I knew nothing about war dogs, but I soon learned, and I joined the staff there and took the job. I got a good orientation by the guys there. He was very experienced in these war dogs. They were tracker dogs and scout dogs, and we had a lot of scout dogs, and we had a few, each platoon had a few tracker dogs that were used. We probably had about 10 war dog platoons out all over Vietnam. They were with each of the divisions. Right away, I said, well, what I will do here is visit each one of those throughout Vietnam, so it's a good opportunity for me to learn all about the country. So I would go find any kind of transportation I could find to get to where I was headed. I'd call the platoon leader, ask him if I came, spent the night, came back the next day. Usually it was all right, so I went to these places, and they were very informative sessions because usually at night I would go to the general officer's briefing for the division, and he got told all about the operations going on the previous day and what was going on the next day. When I came back from each of those trips, I would take pictures, and I would get the pictures developed, and as quickly as I could, I wrote a very lengthy trip report, told all about the platoon, all about what I'd done, showed pictures in it, and then I sent it up the line for the leadership to read what was going on within the scout dog and war dog area. Well, I was in that job. The executive officer of G3, USV, departed, and I guess my trip reports had been pretty impressive to the people who went up, and I was asked to be the executive officer to the G3 of United States Army Vietnam. The G3 was an officer by the name of Colonel Rock Reed. He was a VMI fellow, a very unusual kind of a character. He knew everybody in the Army. It was great to work with him because you got to watch. I remember this job was sort of a paperwork job, and I would take papers into him, try to get him to work on them. He wasn't very interested in the papers, and I remember that he had little metal soldiers on his desk, and each day I'd go in and soldiers were moved around into different places. And one day I asked him, what is the soldiers in the moving? He said, well, I look at those soldiers, and if I don't think the paperwork that comes in is going to help them, then I don't move very swiftly on it. I remember one day, and he wrote lots of letters to friends. He had people he knew all over the Army. One day, he had the afternoon free. And so I said, sir, I got a lot of work to be done, and I've got it lined up there. There's the very important items. There's the next important. There's the minimum. And I appreciated if you could work those things down. And I shut the door in his office. My desk was right outside. A couple hours later, I went back in there, and there'd been nothing done on my work. He'd been writing letters to all the people that he knew. I remember also that one day, George Patton, this is George Patton Jr., came in and to visit him. Went in the office, talked to him about an operation, I think, and then they decided that they were going on the operation together. So Colonel Reed left for one day, took the afternoon out, and went off with the, I think General Patton had the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment. Again, he was a son of World War II General Patton. I stayed in that job about 3 months, and then one day I learned that Colonel Roberts, who I'd known in the 101st Airborne Division, and I mentioned was the one who waved his finger at me in his big hand saying, "Shame on both of your houses," getting after the Sergeant Major and I about a squabble we had had. Anyway, I learned that he was going to be, I knew he was there at USAV headquarters, and I heard that he was going to be assigned as the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division. So I said, maybe if I went over there and congratulated him on his assignment, something could be worked for me to go to the 1st Cav. So I went over and I talked to him, recalled a little bit of times back in the 101st Airborne when he was a colonel and he was a 2-star general. And as I was leaving, he said, "Would you like to go to the Cav with me?" And I said, "Sir, I sure would." And he called his XO in and he told him, "Get Crittenden orders to the Cav." Well, a very short time after that, before they took command, these generals took command of divisions, they got a month off, and they went back to the States, and they were with their families for a month, and then they came back to assume command. What I did during that period is they began to look for a replacement for me, G3, and what I did was ask for R&R, and I went on R&R to Hawaii, where I met Emily. It was a wonderful week. We rented a car, drove all over Hawaii, went to some of the shows that were there, ate in all the good restaurants, and we had a wonderful time. Stayed at the Ilokai Hotel, which was a very nice hotel there in Hawaii. And when we were getting ready to leave, night before, we went out to the airport where my plane was to leave and spent the night there. And then the next morning, I left. And then Emily waited till her plane went. Well, there was some kind of a problem, and her plane did not leave until later. I remember she got into Los Angeles late at night and then had to walk from one of the air terminals to another one, and it was difficult. The transportation was not there at that time of night. She had a pretty bad trip home. I'm sure she was glad to be home after that, although we had a wonderful time. I got back to Vietnam, and then shortly thereafter moved on to the 1st Cav Division, which was north of Saigon, Benoit, and so forth. There, they didn't have an S3 job in a battalion open right at the time, so it was about a week or so before one opened up, and then I joined that unit, the 1st of the 5th Cavalry. And so, in fact, I was in the Cav and in my job before General Roberts took command. At the time I went there, the battalion was at Landing Zone Dolly, and on Dolly, it was up on top of a mountain. The Michelin rubber plantations was all around below, and we'd had a number of contacts in the Michelin rubber plantation because the VC paid off Michelin so as they could continue to operate their rubber plantations. So I never had much sympathy, although I've got Michelin tires on my car now. I never had much sympathy for them because they were helping the other side to continue fighting us. I was on that base for a while, and then we departed that base and moved back to one of the other bases temporarily. President Nixon was coming in, and they needed a lot of security around the base. And I remember they were firing rockets, and our guys would call in and report that a rocket was on the way, and nothing you can do about it. You don't know where it's going to land. You don't know. They weren't that accurate. And then the VC would pick up and move before our units could get there to intercept them. And I remember we had quite a problem with that. Nixon came, went back to the States after his meetings and so forth. We moved to several other fire bases around South Vietnam. A fire base that I'm talking about was a very small fire base. It was maybe 150 or 200 yards across. It had one company for security of the base. It had a unit of 105s, and it had some of the elements, S3, S2 were there, and the S1, the administrative people, and the S4 supply people were in the rear. Normally, each day, by the way, I might mention, we got 2 helicopters. One went to the command group, the battalion commander and myself, to visit the companies, and one went to the S1, the administrator and supply, and that was used to supply the companies all day long, flying back and forth to wherever they were, taking the mail, taking the water, taking the supplies, taking food, taking whatever the companies needed. Whenever we had to move from one base to the other, we conducted a helicopter assault, and they were pretty complicated operations. You planned them, and then you went out first and you adjusted the artillery to be sure it came in to the right places around where you wanted to land. You did it at several places so the enemy couldn't be sure where you were going to land if they were observing this. And you went back, you planned, got the Air Force come in at a certain time. Then you had the gunships that were going to escort, and maybe you'd have 8 Huey helicopters which would be carrying the troops. And then the commander and I would be above, circling around. And so we'd start the artillery fire on the zone, and all of that artillery fire would go on heavily for 2 minutes, 1 or 2 minutes before. Then the Air Force would come in and drop the bombs on either side. And then we had the gunships. The helicopter gunships would come in and strafe the woods on either side of the landing zone. And then the helicopters with the troops would come in and assault in the center of that area, and they would land and then move. Usually we didn't get enough helicopters to get the whole company in at once. So we then had to go back, pick up the other piece of the company, and then bring it into the assault area. And they were very active times. And I remember I was on the radio screaming at people to do this, get this done, move here, so forth. And then after this thing ended and things got quieted down, I would have a call, say, my call sign was General Motors 6, and I'd have a call from someone, and they would ask if everything was going all right. Now, this someone was the assistant division commander, and he'd been flying around above me watching the whole thing. And I thought to myself, oh, my goodness, his name was General Casey, and he was certain to be the Chief of Staff of the Army. His son did make Chief of Staff, but General Casey was an impressive individual, and he was so helpful to me whenever we needed it, and he seemed to always be listening on our radio. A lot of times I wish he hadn't been listening. We had several attacks on the bases that we were in, usually got really good intelligence in advance, so we knew that they'd be coming that night, and so we'd get in position. Usually they weren't surprised. We'd gotten some kind of intelligence that would tell us about these things. And then the attack would come at night. Our guys were all under sandbags and really well protected, and they defended the base. And then the next morning, you went outside to see what had happened, and the enemy would lose lots of people in these attacks. I remember one case, they lost so many that we had a bulldozer come in and dig a big trench, and then we put the bodies in that trench and covered it up. Some talk about how the North Vietnamese kept track of their, I tell you, in our area, they had no chance of keeping track because so many were killed. One of the situations I remember most on a base under attack, our battalion was going to take over the base of another battalion the next day. So I went to that base with 3 or 4 NCOs, and we were going to spend the night there and then be ready to receive our battalion when it came in the next day. Well, we got word while we were there that the base was going to come under attack that night, and there were 4 of us there. And, of course, we didn't have any responsibility for the defense, but we got ourselves all under sandbags and got sandbag area around the area we sort of operated out of as our CP. And when the attack came, one of the sergeants was outside of his area, and I heard him yelling, "It's hot water, it's hot water." And we got to him to find out, couldn't find out what it was at first. And then we found out a piece of shrapnel had gone in his back, and the hot shrapnel, he just felt like somebody pouring hot water on him, so that's what he was screaming about. Well, of course, we couldn't get him out till the next day, but I think he did all right. The next day, the unit that was there departed, and then our unit came in, and then we occupied their command post that we had not been able to get into the night before. So it was a very active time. I remember on one occasion, I was visiting a company, went to visit a company. The company commander was a little Hawaiian guy, he's great company commander. And as I was going in there, we got tremendous amount of fire from I think it was a 50 caliber machine gun. The pilot was taking all the actions that he could to keep from getting hit, but he did get hit, and we went into horrible vibrations. I remember the company commander on the ground that I was just mentioning called up and he said, "General Motors 3, are you in my area?" And I said, "Roger, I am." And he said, "General Motors 3, you're really taking fire." And I called back, "No," and no kidding, but I didn't use the word kidding. It was something else. I thought we were vibrating so badly. And I, by the way, was trying to coordinate somebody getting on the radio, trying to get somebody to go after that machine gun. It would have been sort of useless because they knew the trails, they knew how to get away, and they'd have been gone before we got anybody. But anyway, I was trying my best to get some kind of fire on the machine gun that had been fired. I thought the thing to do was to just go down, but the helicopter, and like I said, it was vibrating so badly, the helicopter pilot thought he could make it to a safe area, and he was right. We did get to a more secure area. We landed, and when we got out and looked at the helicopter blade, it had a big hunk knocked out of the blade, and although the helicopter had taken some hits, that damage to the rotor was what really was causing us a problem. Those things have to be balanced very carefully, and this a big hunk out of the blade, and near the end, by the way, caused us a lot of problems. When I got ready to leave Vietnam, getting near time, General Casey, who I got to know very well and liked him very much, asked me if I would like to stay on, if I would stay on, and take command of one of the battalions of the 1st Cav. And I told him, sir, I've been over here for 24 months, away from my wife. I think I better go home. And he said, I understand. And so that was sort of the end of it for him. Later, General Roberts came out, and he said, wondered if you would like to stay on and command a battalion. I'll give you the next one that comes open. And I told him the same thing, that I thought I'd better depart. Anyway, when I was departing, and I went back through division, and General Casey and General Roberts invited me to come to the General Officers Mess that night, and I had supper there, and it was very nice. I appreciate them very much. So it was late 69 then, and I was heading home. I went back to Long Bend. That's where we were going to leave from. And I'd left some of my clothes and some of my items with a fellow named Ted Voorhees, who was also there. And when I went back, I found out Ted had been assigned out in the field. I wondered, where in the world is my stuff that I left for him to cover while I went to the Cav? I asked another fellow, and he said, oh, I got it. I said, thank goodness. So I had this suitcase with some stuff in it, and then I was able to find it, and I took those home with me. There also, I went back to see Colonel Reed, Colonel Rock Reed, and he invited me to go to the General Officers Mess there at Long Bend, the Army General Officers Mess. And he came back, sat down. We talked a long time. He's very interested in hearing from junior officers. I was a major. And so I told him about the operations there. He was interested in personalities and how certain generals operated. And I told him what I could about how the Cav had operated during that time. And I remember, I thought I'd gotten very well cleaned up. And I had my helmet cover that was the same that I'd had in the field. And I didn't pay much attention to it, but it was orange. It wasn't a color because I'd been in so much mud and gotten so dirty. I had clean fatigues on, and he commented on how dirty the helmet was. At any rate, we caught plane out of Long Bend and flew back to the States.